So, what's the difference between a professional musician and an amateur musician? I heard a very interesting quote about this, and I have to say I totally disagree with it. Now, this quote came from a book called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. I have not read the book, so I can't comment on it. It seems to be a self-help book for creatives, not just musicians. But I heard the quote read by Cameron on his Venus Theory channel. I will put a link to that in the description. I will attempt to paraphrase the quote, but it's probably a good idea to click the link and hear it in full. Now, he's talking about creatives in general, but that includes musicians. And as we are musicians on this channel, I shall assume that he is talking about musicians. So what he is saying is that the professional does not over-identify with being a musician. The amateur, on the other hand, believes themselves to be a musician and are so heavily invested in that it virtually paralyzes them, and they are afraid to do anything because of a fear of failure. So I thought this was an interesting quote and an interesting point of view, so let me tell you why I think it is totally wrong. Let's take the amateur musician. Now, by amateur we usually mean someone who does something just for fun and not for money. But an amateur also means someone who doesn't have the skills or the knowledge or the experience to be, well, a professional. Someone who is just starting out and learning whatever it is they are learning. So when you are just starting out, you are trying to learn your instrument, you're trying to learn production methods, music theory, composition, whatever it is you're trying to do. Now, I actually really don't understand where the fear of failure comes into this. If you were afraid of failing, then you wouldn't start in the first place. And once you started, if you were afraid of failing, you wouldn't continue. So to me, this really doesn't make sense. When I was learning the keyboard, I enjoyed composing, and I was very keen to play my compositions to anyone who would listen. I had absolutely no idea if they were any good or not, and of course if you play them to friends and family, they are all going to say they are absolutely marvellous. But worrying about whether anyone would enjoy these or not just didn't enter my head. I think as a musician, you are enthused by the idea of making music, of creating music, so that is what you do. If you had any fear of failure, you simply wouldn't start, or at some point you would stop. Now, if we take the professional musician, Pressfield says they realise that they are not their job. Now, I'm sure that the idea that you are not your job, you are not what you do, has been around for decades, but for some reason it seems to have become a bit of a meme on YouTube and the internet. So Pressfield says that the professional musician realizes that they are not their job. Now, while I would hope that is true for most people in most jobs and most situations, I do think that the professional musician has got to identify as being a musician more closely, certainly, than the amateur. Can you imagine walking into an audition and saying, I'm not a musician, but I do make music? Next! It just doesn't work like that. I think a professional musician has to be more invested in what they are doing than the amateur, certainly if they want to continue making money from their work. I think it's in the nature of the job of being a musician, whether you're a gigging musician working in clubs, whether you're in a band making records in the studio, whether you work in the studio, whether you're a composer. I think when a job is on the line, then you have to be very heavily invested in that to make sure that you do a good job. Pressfield sort of suggests that professional musicians can keep it at arm's length. I think most professional musicians want to do a good job and will take their work home with them, as it were, to make sure that they do. In addition, In order to get continuous work or more work, the professional musician has to present as a musician or a producer or a composer in order to get clients and in order to get work. So the idea that I think Pressfield is suggesting is that the professional musician can leave the office at 5 o'clock and go home to, shall we say, a normal life. I don't think that is realistic. And I don't think it's practical, and I don't think that is what most professional musicians do. Now, that's not to say that a professional musician has to invest every waking minute in their music, but it is to say that they do need to be more heavily invested, shall we say, than the amateur who is not doing it for money, or at least not at the moment. So that's my take on this quote, and that's why I think Pressfield has got it wrong. I'm going to assume that you are a musician. Perhaps you just like listening to electronic music and hear me talk about synthesizers, which is totally fine. But if you are a musician, I would really like to know what you think of this proposition, of this suggestion. I can only speak from my own experience and that of a few friends, so it would be really interesting to know where you are on the scale of amateur and professional and how you think about yourself and your music. Is Pressfield right? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there scribbling your comments, perhaps you would like to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. Thank you, so you get informed of new videos as soon as I release them. And if you've enjoyed the video, please do click the big thumb. It all helps the channel and it takes but a second. As always, I really do appreciate you taking your time to watch my videos. So for that, thank you very much indeed. And I will see you in the next one.